In a city where hospitals heal bodies but often ignore the souls who keep them alive, one black nurse stood her ground when silence was demanded and dignity was dismissed. She was slapped, fired, erased. But what they didn't know was that she would return, not in anger, but in power. This is not just a story about injustice. It's about truth that refused to be buried, and a woman who turned her pain into a blueprint for change. You're watching Flow Story, and this is the story of Alicia Grant. It was the kind of evening that wrapped the city in gold, where light filtered between skyscrapers and the hum of New York settled into a quiet lull just before night truly took over. Inside St. Joseph's Private Clinic, one of Manhattan's most prestigious medical facilities, the halls glowed sterile and polished, echoing the rhythmic steps of a staff that had long learned to move in silence. And among them, slipping into her scrubs with the practiced grace of someone who had done this too many times to count, was Alicia Grant. At 29, Alicia was the backbone of the night shift, the one who knew where the backup syringes were when others panicked, the one who caught errors on charts others skimmed past, the one patients instinctively reached for when fear overtook them at 3 a.m. Her presence was composed, her touch steady, but what many didn't see, what most never even thought to ask, was how much weight it took for her to remain calm in a place that had quietly trained her to make herself small. Alicia was a black woman in a white coat, in a white world, not overtly excluded, but never fully included either. Her hair, coiled tightly in a bun, had once been labeled unprofessional by a new supervisor who barely lasted a week. Her voice, firm but warm, had been described as a bit aggressive when she spoke up during a team meeting. When she excelled, the compliments always came with surprise. "Wow, you're very articulate." And when mistakes happened in her unit, the questions somehow found their way to her desk first, even if she hadn't touched the patient. She wasn't paranoid, she was just practiced, the way women like her had to be. That night, she greeted her coworkers with quiet nods and began her rounds. Her badge clipped cleanly to her chest read, Alicia Grant, RN, Charge Nurse. But she knew what some read first was her skin. And most nights, she swallowed it, until recently. Recently, one particular patient had begun to unravel her calm. Mr. Kane, early 60s, wheelchair-bound, no listed relatives or emergency contacts. On paper, a sad case. In person, something else entirely. The first time he called her darling instead of nurse, she had ignored it. When he asked if all that cocoa was natural, she had laughed it off, hoping to shame him through awkward silence. But Mr. Kane wasn't just inappropriate, he was calculated. And Alicia had started to dread his room like a shadow in her mind. He would always find reasons to ask for her, even when others were available. Blankets out of place. Pills he accidentally dropped. A call bell hit 3 times an hour just to have her adjust his IV pole half an inch. He never said anything threatening, but he never needed to. The way his eyes lingered when she turned, the way his hand brushed too long against hers, and the way he smirked every time she tried to remain professional, it wasn't flirtation. It was control. And Alicia, like too many women before her, told herself to keep breathing, keep moving, keep smiling. Because it wasn't bad enough, was it? That was the unspoken rule. Unless it left bruises or blood, it didn't count. She'd mentioned him once, briefly, to a fellow nurse who'd simply shrugged and said, "He's an old man, just lonely. He probably doesn't mean anything by it." But Alicia knew better. It wasn't about what he meant. It was about how he made her feel, like her body wasn't hers in that room, like her dignity was negotiable if the other person seemed harmless. That night, at precisely 7:04 p.m., she was standing at the nurse's station reviewing a pediatric chart when his call bell lit up again. Room 208, Mr. Kane. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaled through her nose, and then stood. "Just get through it," she told herself. She walked down the polished hallway, her sneakers making soft squeaks against the tile. As she entered the room, she found him already watching the door, his lips curling before she even spoke. "Evening, pretty thing," he purred. Alicia forced a neutral tone. "Good evening, Mr. Kane. What do you need?" "My blanket slipped," he said, voice low, eyes never leaving her figure. "Could you tuck me in?" She hesitated, then nodded once. Routine care. Nothing she hadn't done 100 times. But the moment she leaned down, he moved. His hand, fast, firm, deliberate, reached out and touched her inner thigh. Not a graze, not a mistake, a grip. She froze. He smirked. Something primal and ancient rose in her chest like a roar caged too long. And before she could think, Alicia's hand snapped across his face with a loud, echoing crack. His head jerked to the side. His eyes, for the first time, registered shock, and she didn't wait. She turned and walked straight out, heart thudding in her ears, shame and fury braided into every step. She didn't stop at the desk. She went straight to the clinic director's office. Dr. Martin Brown, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and obsession with the clinic's reputation, looked up from his paperwork as she entered, his brows furrowed. "Miss Grant?" "Dr. Brown," she said, trying to steady her breath. "I need to report an incident. It's serious." He gestured, mildly annoyed. "Go on." Alicia told him everything, how Mr. Kane had behaved over the past few weeks, how he touched her tonight, how she reacted. She expected, if not empathy, then at least concern. But something in his face shifted, his jaw clenched, and without a word, he stood up and struck her. The slap was sharp and sudden, across her left cheek. Two nurses walking past the glass hallway froze. Alicia staggered half a step, hand to her face, eyes wide. "You assaulted a patient?" he bellowed. "Are you out of your damn mind?" "He touched me," she said, breathless. "Inappropriately, repeatedly. I defended myself." "No one gives you the right to lay hands on a patient," he growled, "especially not someone in a wheelchair." "So, my body is dispensable?" she whispered. "I'm replaceable?" "You're done here, Nurse Grant. Get out." The hallway outside fell silent. No one moved, no one stopped him. Alicia walked out, her dignity trailing behind her like a torn hem. That night, New York rain slammed against her apartment window like the world itself was grieving something. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in uniform, the sting of two slaps, one from a predator, the other from a system, radiating like burns on her soul. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Not because she wasn't broken, but because she wasn't done. Somewhere in the ceilings of Sankey's. Joseph's, a red light blinked quietly above room 208. A camera, recording, waiting. Truth always has a way of finding the light, even in a place designed to keep women like her in the shadows. And that night, while the city kept moving and Alicia sat alone in silence, something shifted. Not in the world, in her. And it would shake the clinic to its core. The night stretched endlessly, thick with rain and questions that refused to be answered. Alicia sat curled in the corner of her small apartment, a throw blanket draped over her knees, more out of habit than comfort. The buzz of fluorescent streetlights bled through the half-closed blinds, painting long shadows across the walls, shadows that moved each time a siren passed below. She hadn't changed out of her scrubs. Her badge still hung loosely from her pocket, slightly askew, as if it too had been caught off guard by the sudden end to the life she knew. Her phone buzzed, then again. Then again. The group chat from the night shift blinked with unread messages. "I heard what happened. Are you okay? Was it true? We saw Dr. Brown yell at someone. Was that you? I'm so sorry, Alicia. This isn't fair." But what struck her wasn't the words. It was who didn't say anything. Not a single message from Dr. Brown, not a call, not a question, not a hint of concern. Not one of her direct supervisors who had praised her just last week for handling the pediatric seizure case with calm brilliance. Not the nurse manager who promised her a raise in next quarter's review. Silence. Institutional silence. The kind that grows roots when the people in charge realize that admitting a mistake costs more than burying one. Alicia placed her phone face down. The apartment around her was still. Too still. This was the same room where she'd once studied at midnight, running through flashcards with trembling fingers and dreams of being the kind of nurse that changed lives. The same walls that had held her laughter when her brother had visited last Christmas. The same floor she had paced on the night her father passed away, waiting for the hospital to confirm what her heart already knew. And now these walls held something else. Humiliation. Not just because she had been touched, not just because she had been hit, but because after everything she had done, everything she had endured, they had made it look like she was the problem, She walked to the mirror in her hallway and looked at herself. Her cheek still bore the faint red imprint of Dr. Brown's hand. But that wasn't what broke her. It was the way her own eyes looked back, disoriented, betrayed, and worst of all, unsure. Was she wrong to react? Should she have kept quiet? Should she have waited for a more appropriate moment? Should she have accepted that men like Mr. Kane were just part of the job? No. The word echoed, quiet but firm. No. She hadn't been wrong. She had been honest. And for that, she was punished. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she pulled out the journal she hadn't opened in months, flipping through pages of handwritten notes about patient care plans, emotional reflections from the COVID unit, and moments she had once been proud of. She reached a blank page. Then she began to write. Tonight, I lost my job, but more than that, I lost the illusion. The illusion that being good, being honest, being excellent would protect me from the machinery of image and silence. I watched a man with power choose a lie over a truth because the truth had melanin and a voice. She stopped, the pen hovering. Then, without thinking, she wrote a name. Dr. Brown. And under it, he looked me in the eye and erased me. Not because he didn't believe me, because believing me would have forced him to question everything he built. And men like him don't question. They control. The storm outside roared, matching the one churning inside her. The city that never slept pressed on while she stood frozen in the middle of her life, abruptly severed. She walked to her fridge and pressed her forehead against its cold steel. The sensation grounded her. She hadn't cried. Not yet. Grief hadn't found a doorway. But something else had. A flicker. Not rage, not revenge. Something deeper. The sense that she would not let this be the end. Even if the world refused to believe her. Something had seen it. Somewhere in that clinic, she remembered, were cameras. Quiet, unobtrusive, blinking red when no one noticed. Could they have captured it? Was there a record? And even if there was, would they ever admit it? Would they even check? Or would they just delete it and pretend the night never happened? Her heart thudded at the thought. She couldn't go back. Not yet. But maybe the truth could. She opened her laptop, began drafting an email, not to HR, not to the director, but to a friend who once mentioned working in compliance. It wasn't an accusation, not yet. It was a question. Do you know if patient room hallways have surveillance? She hit send. Then she turned off the lights and sat in the dark, not because she was hiding, but because sometimes the dark was honest. It didn't pretend. It didn't filter. It didn't ask her to smile when she didn't want to. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Keisha, the new hire from Baltimore. If you ever want to talk, I've been through some things too. You're not alone. Alicia stared at the message. Her fingers hovered, then typed, "Thanks." One word. It wasn't surrender, it was survival. Outside, the rain softened, not gone, just changed, like her. Like the silence between one moment and the next. Isis twists. 3 days. That's how long it had been since Alicia walked out of St. Joseph's Clinic with a stinging cheek, a terminated badge, and a career that felt like it had been torn from her chest. 3 days of silence from the people who used to call her the calm at the center of the storm. 3 days of rain, of unanswered texts, of polite apologies that felt more like empty air than real care. 3 days of waiting. For what? She didn't know. Not a call, not an offer, just something. She hadn't left her apartment, not because she was hiding, but because the outside world moved on so fast, and her soul hadn't caught up yet. On the third morning, as New York slowly shook off its morning fog and honked itself back to life, Alicia sat at her dining table with a mug of tea she hadn't touched. She hadn't changed much, still in lounge clothes, still barefoot, still wondering if maybe she should have screamed louder, or maybe stayed silent longer. Her phone buzzed. She expected it to be another vague message, maybe Kesha again, or someone asking for an update she didn't have. But this time, the screen showed something different. A call, unknown number. Alicia hesitated. She rarely picked up unknown numbers, but something deep in her gut urged her to answer. Her thumb hovered, then tapped. "Hello?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "Good morning. Is this Nurse Alicia Grant?" A woman's voice, clear, measured, corporate, but not cold. "Yes, speaking. This is Allison Rhee, I'm part of the internal IT compliance team at St. Joseph's. I know this may be unexpected, but I'd like to request your presence at the clinic today. There is something we need to review with you regarding your termination." Alicia's grip on the phone tightened. Her heartbeat thumped once, hard. She didn't respond immediately. "I don't understand." "There's new information," the woman continued, her tone carefully professional. "We believe it would be best discussed in person. I assure you, you are not in any trouble. Would 2 p.m. work for you?" Alicia stared at the chipped paint on the wall beside her kitchen. Her thoughts raced. Why now? Was this an ambush? A ploy? A legal move to cover themselves? Part of her wanted to say no, to never step foot in that building again. But that flicker, that small ember that had refused to die, said, "Go. If they're calling you, they need something. That means power has shifted, even just a little." "I'll be there," she said quietly. "Thank you. You'll be met at the front desk." The call ended. Alicia sat in the silence afterward like it was a sudden storm. Her fingers trembled as she set the phone down. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain now. They were calling her back, and that meant something had cracked. At exactly 1:58 p.m., Alicia stood outside the glass doors of St. Joseph's. She hadn't been back since that night. The same doors she'd exited in disgrace were now reflecting her back with subtle distortion. Tired eyes, pressed coat, hair neatly pulled back. She didn't look like the same woman, and in some ways, she wasn't. The receptionist, a younger woman Alicia remembered vaguely, Haley, looked up and blinked. "Ms. Grant," she said, as if unsure whether to smile or apologize. "They're expecting you." She gestured toward the back elevators. "Someone will meet you downstairs." Alicia nodded, saying nothing. As she walked through the hallway, she felt the shift. The usual casual conversations halted. People glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Not with disdain this time, but with guilt and curiosity. It was quiet in a different way now. Not indifference, but fear. The kind of fear that comes when the lie everyone accepted suddenly begins to shake. A man in a gray security badge met her by the elevator. "This way, ma'am," he said simply. They didn't take her to HR, not to the main admin wing. They descended, lower, into a level Alicia hadn't even known existed beneath the clinic. Sub-level 1. The walls were metal and painted white. The air hummed with the sound of servers and surveillance. The hallway they walked through had no windows, just a buzz. The door they stopped at was thick, reinforced. The man opened it without a word. Inside was a long table, a mounted screen on the far wall, and 4 people already seated. Dr. Brown, Mr. Kane, a woman in a black blazer who exuded legal counsel energy, and a man with glasses and a St. Joseph's ID badge that read, "Marcus, IT Compliance." The room was silent. The tension was so tight it could cut skin. Alicia stepped in and stood by the doorway. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. Dr. Brown looked up at her, not with superiority this time, but with something she had never seen in his eyes before, discomfort, maybe even shame. "Alicia," he said, standing, "please have a seat." She sat, not for him, for herself. The woman in the blazer cleared her throat. "Miss Grant, thank you for coming. I'm Dana Wells, Legal Compliance Officer for the clinic. We've reviewed something that requires your attention." Alicia didn't reply. Her eyes locked on Mr. Kane. He sat slouched in his wheelchair, but his arrogance had dimmed. His jaw clenched slightly. She could see the nervous twitch in his right temple. Dana gestured to the man beside her. "This is Marcus. He's going to present a clip pulled from our security system, specifically from the hallway outside room 208. As you know, certain areas of the clinic have discrete surveillance, primarily for safety and liability reasons. The interaction between yourself and Mr. Kane was captured. We felt it best for you to see it in this room, together, in full transparency." Alicia nodded once. Her heart beat like a snare drum. Marcus clicked a remote. The screen flickered to life. And there she was, on video, walking down the hallway in scrubs, face tired but calm. Mr. Kane was at the doorway, smiling that same cruel smile. He made his request. She followed him in. And then, clearly visibly, he reached, touched, gripped. Alicia flinched on screen. Her body recoiled. And she struck him, not wildly, not vengefully, defensively, immediately, instinctively. The sound of the slap was faint, but clear. The video ended. No one moved. Alicia stared at the blank screen. Her breathing was controlled, but her hands beneath the table had curled into fists. Mr. Kane began to speak, but Dana raised her hand. "Don't!" Her voice was clipped, final. Dr. Brown's face had lost all color. He looked at Alicia. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't believe you. I failed." "No," Alicia interrupted. Her voice was calm but unshakable. "You didn't fail me. You failed yourself. You chose your image over my humanity." No one spoke after that. Even the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Alicia stood. The truth was always here. You just didn't care enough to look for it. Then she turned toward the door, not waiting for permission, not asking for forgiveness. She didn't need to. Her truth had already spoken. The clip had done what her voice couldn't. It had made the invisible real. The silence that once protected the predator now exposed him. The lie that cost her everything now started to cost them. She didn't look back, because she didn't need to see them unravel. She already knew they would. When Alicia stepped out of that cold white room in the sublevel of St. Joseph's, the air hit different. Not colder, not warmer, but lighter, like something heavy had been dragged out of her chest without warning. She didn't rush. She didn't look over her shoulder. She just walked, steady, deliberate, through a corridor lined with silent servers and unseen truths. The security officer who had escorted her earlier waited outside the door, but this time he didn't say a word. His eyes met hers for just a second, just long enough for Alicia to see something flicker behind them. Respect, maybe, or regret. She didn't care which. She didn't need apologies from walls that watched her be erased and said nothing. The elevator rose in silence. She could see her reflection in the metal, face calm, lips set, eyes that no longer held questions. The first time she had walked out of this building, her body had been buzzing with adrenaline and shame. This time, she wasn't buzzing, she was anchored. The reception desk came into view. Haley glanced up and stood halfway. "Ms. Grant?" she started, then faltered. Alicia nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that said more than either of them had words for. She stepped into the sunlight outside, blinking against the sudden glare. It was a crisp day, one of those rare moments in New York when the wind feels clean and the city forgets to be hostile. She looked up at the sky, not searching for answers, just taking in the stillness. 3 days ago, the world had collapsed under her feet. And now, the world was still spinning. But it didn't feel the same. She didn't feel the same. Her feet moved almost by instinct toward the subway, but she stopped at the corner instead. She wasn't ready to disappear underground just yet. She wanted to feel the noise, the honks, the cabs rushing past, the energy of a city that never cared what happened behind hospital doors. She leaned against the brick wall of a bagel shop, pulled out her phone, and checked her inbox. There were more messages now, dozens. "We just heard what happened, that footage. I can't believe they treated you like that. You were right all along." Some from nurses, some from people she barely knew, some anonymous. One stood out, from Jenna, a lab tech who had witnessed the aftermath. It simply read, "I'm sorry I stayed quiet. You didn't deserve that. None of us did." Alicia stared at the words. She thought she'd feel angry, but she didn't. She felt tired, because it wasn't just about her. It never had been. This system had eaten women like her before. It would try again, but this time, it choked. She looked up at the blue sky. No victory parade, no medals, just clarity. She started walking again, not toward the train now, but toward home. Her mind moved slowly, like thawing after a long winter. She made it up the stairs to her apartment, tossed her bag onto the couch, and stood in the middle of the room. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. The crooked certificate still hung above her desk. Registered nurse, Alicia Monet Grant. She walked to it. For the first time in days, it didn't mock her. It reminded her. Not of the job she lost, but of the woman she never let go. The sound of an email notification broke the silence. She turned, picked up her phone. Subject: Position opportunity at Haven Crest Medical Center. Her brows furrowed. She tapped to open. "Dear Ms. Alicia Grant, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Dr. Angela Barrett, Director of Nursing Operations at Haven Crest Medical Center. Over the past 24 hours, your story has reached our leadership team through professional networks and internal advisory circles. We were deeply moved, not only by the injustice you faced, but by the grace, professionalism, and conviction with which you stood in truth. We are currently restructuring our acute care unit and are seeking a leader who embodies the kind of strength and moral clarity that can reshape institutional culture. We believe you are that leader. We would be honored to extend to you an offer to join Havencrest as head nurse of acute care services, effective immediately should you accept. The position includes full benefits, executive mentorship, flexible scheduling, and a starting annual salary of $124,000. Please find the formal offer and onboarding documents attached. We are not only offering you a job, we are inviting you to lead a cultural shift that is already overdue. With deep respect, Dr. Angela Barrett. Alicia's breath caught. She reread the email, then again. It wasn't just an offer, it was an affirmation, a validation. It was someone saying, "We saw what they tried to do to you. We believe what you did was right, and we need people like you in power." Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the PDF. A full contract, her name printed on the first line. She sat down on the couch and stared at it, her heart slowly building a rhythm she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, not the kind that begged, but the kind that claimed. She stood again, walked to her closet. At the back, still in its plastic cover, was her best white coat, the one with her name embroidered in blue above the left breast. She took it out gently, like touching a memory reborn. She didn't cry, she smiled. A small one, but real, the kind that meant something was beginning. She placed the coat on the back of her chair and turned back to the screen. The cursor blinked beside the word, reply. She began typing, "Dear Dr. Barrett, thank you for your email and for your extraordinary kindness. I am deeply honored by this offer and profoundly grateful that my story resonated not as tragedy, but as a call to action. Please consider this my official acceptance. I look forward to joining Havencrest and helping lead a culture where compassion and justice are not mutually exclusive. With heartfelt appreciation, Alicia Grant, RN." She hit send, and with that, a door closed, not in bitterness, but in strength. Her phone buzzed with a calendar notification. New beginning, Havencrest, Monday, 9 a.m. Alicia stood at her window, watching the city below. People rushed, buses sighed, horns screamed, and in the middle of all that chaos, she stood still. Not broken, not healed, but rising. Sometimes justice isn't a storm, it's a whisper, a phone call, a line of text, an offer with your name printed bold and unapologetic. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. The elevator doors at Havencrest Medical Center opened with a gentle chime that somehow felt intentional. Not cold, not sterile, just present, like the building itself breathed with purpose. Alicia stepped out onto the 4th floor where the acute care division lived, a bright corridor lined with modern art and soft beige walls that somehow didn't scream hospital, but whispered healing. Her scrubs, newly pressed in deep navy, seemed to carry more weight now, not because of their fabric, but because of what was pinned to her chest. Alicia Grant, RN, head nurse, acute care division. The badge gleamed under the hallway lights, and for the first time in a long time, her name wasn't just a label, it was a declaration. As she passed the welcome desk, a young receptionist stood quickly. "Good morning, Nurse Grant. We're really glad you're here." Alicia smiled, small but warm. "So am I." It wasn't a lie. She was nervous, that much was true, but not scared, not this time. She moved through the unit slowly, not because she didn't know where to go, but because she wanted to feel the place. Not its walls, but its people. The nurses at the station looked up as she arrived. Some had read about her story. Others had only heard whispers, but all of them paused. One of them, a woman with locks tied back in a patterned scarf, smiled. "You must be Alicia. I'm Kendra. Been praying for you, girl, even before I knew your name." Alicia's throat tightened a little, but she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "Truly?" She turned to the entire team. "We'll have introductions soon, but for now, I just want to start this day by hearing what you need. No monologue, no hierarchy. I'm not here to command. I'm here to build." That sentence hung in the air for a moment, soft as breath, but firm as truth. And in that moment, something shifted. The way shoulders relaxed, the way someone in the back uncrossed their arms, the way a few heads nodded without meaning to. Alicia had only been here 5 minutes, but already she was trusted. By 9:45 a.m., as she had finished initial rounds and stepped into her office, a small space, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that overlooked a rooftop garden where patients sometimes walked. On her desk sat a single folder labeled Orientation Notes and a ceramic mug with the words, "Integrity is policy." A post-it note was stuck to it. "Welcome to the kind of place we all wished existed. You make it more real just by walking in. Angela." Alicia smiled. She opened the file, flipped through schedules, rotation conflicts, onboarding charts, and then, tucked in the back, a document marked Grant Protocol, Internal Guidelines Draft, V1.0. She froze. Slowly she pulled it out. The pages outlined Havencrest's new policy for handling workplace harassment, especially involving power differentials, race-based microaggressions, and institutional response structures. It wasn't just a rulebook, it was reform, based on her story. The final page had her name in bold italics, modeled after principles and circumstances detailed in the case of Alicia Grant, RN. Her eyes burned for a second, but she blinked it back. Not now. Later, there would be time to cry, to release. But right now, there was work to do. At 10:15 a.m., 2 interns appeared at her door, fidgeting with clipboards and nerves. They looked barely out of college. One black girl with bright eyes. One white boy with a stutter he tried to hide with long words. Alicia stood. "You two must be shadowing today." They nodded quickly. "I'm Nurse Grant, but just Alicia is fine if that helps you breathe easier. I'm your map today. If you get lost, I'll guide. If you trip, I'll catch. And if someone makes you feel small, I'll be your voice until you find your own." They both stared at her like she had just handed them something holy. And maybe she had, because for them, she wasn't just a supervisor. She was a sign that this place might actually be different, that this system might not eat them alive, that they could grow here, not hide. By noon, the unit was buzzing. Alicia had already resolved a scheduling error, jumped in to cover an emergency IV insertion, and pulled aside a nurse who hadn't taken PTO in over 4 months and asked, gently, why. The nurse had blinked, startled. "No one's ever asked me that before." "Then let me be the first," Alicia said, "and not the last." In the afternoon, a social worker stopped by, then a unit manager from pediatrics. Word had spread fast. People wanted to meet her, not because of gossip, but because something about her presence made people believe again. Believe that integrity could lead, that truth didn't have to cost you your future. It could build it. By the end of the day, Alicia sat in her office once more, this time with her shoes off and her hands wrapped around that "Integrity is Policy" mug, filled now with lukewarm tea. She stared out the window at the garden below. A young woman in a wheelchair was laughing with a physical therapist. A bird landed on the railing. The sky had begun to pinken, and Alicia exhaled for the first time all day. Not because the work was over, but because she was no longer alone in it. Her phone buzzed, a message from Kesha. Just 3 words? "They're watching Alicia." Not a threat, a reminder. The world hadn't forgotten. Her former co-workers, the silent witnesses, the man who thought he could grab without consequence. The director who silenced her with a slap. They were watching now, watching what happened when the truth they tried to bury stood up, walked away, and started to build something better. Alicia replied, "Let them." Then she leaned back, smiled into the soft hum of Havencrest's lights, and whispered into the stillness of her new world. Let them see what dignity looks like when it doesn't flinch. Across town, while Alicia was reviewing care rotation schedules and reintroducing dignity into medicine, one conversation at a time, St. Joseph's Clinic began to fracture, not with headlines or lawsuits, but with something far more dangerous to an institution built on image: whispers. Not the hushed, uncertain whispers of confused staff. These were different now. These were precise, sharpened. People had seen the footage. Not all, of course, but enough. Enough for the truth to begin moving faster than the administration could contain it. And in places like that, truth is more dangerous than scandal, because it forces a reckoning without the luxury of spin. Dr. Martin Brown sat at his desk alone, the same polished desk from which he had once dismissed a woman with the flick of a hand and a booming voice. Now, his hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles pale, a man who had spent his entire career mastering control, only to realize he had miscalculated one thing: the power of a woman who refused to stay silent. On the corner of his desk sat a single file folder marked Internal Accountability Initiative. Inside were pages he never thought he'd approve: policy drafts about trauma-informed leadership, anonymous reporting systems, quarterly mandatory training on racial bias, and professional boundaries. Things he once called unnecessary. Now they were scripture. But the part that haunted him wasn't the policy. It was the blank space on page 1, where the initiative's dedication line should have gone. No one had asked him to include it. No one had suggested a name. But he wrote one anyway, on the inside cover of his personal copy. Not for public view, just for himself. What would Alicia Grant have done? It was a quiet penance, insufficient. But something. He had lost more than control. He had lost his own compass, and that, perhaps, was the greater failure. Outside his office, nurses walked a little more carefully around him now. Not out of fear, but because they were watching. Because power, once revealed as fragile, is never quite respected the same way again. The clinic's legal team had advised against direct acknowledgement. Let it settle, they said. Don't stoke the fire. But the fire was already burning, and it wasn't Alicia who lit it. It was their refusal to listen, their commitment to silence, to image, and that choice now lived in every hallway, every morning huddle, every pair of eyes that no longer met his quite the same way. Meanwhile, at Havencrest, Alicia sat across from a trauma response specialist named Carmen, an older Latina with eyes that missed nothing and a voice like velvet over gravel. So, Carmen said, pouring tea into 2 matching mugs. You've been here 3 days, and already staff from cardiology are quoting you in their morning huddles. Alicia blinked. Quoting me. Apparently you said something about rebuilding trust before policies, that it's about the tone of a place, not just the structure. They loved it. Alicia chuckled. I say a lot of things when I haven't slept. Yes, but the right people are listening. Carmen leaned forward. You know that's rare, right? For a system to listen before it's forced to. Alicia nodded. I know. That's why I'm still a little afraid. Carmen smiled gently. Good. People who aren't afraid of power tend to abuse it. You'll wear it like armor, not a weapon. The conversation stayed with Alicia long after Carmen left. That night, she walked the halls of the acute care unit not as an administrator, but as a guardian. She stopped by room 407, where a 17-year-old girl named Deja was recovering from a traumatic delivery. The girl hadn't spoken much, barely ate, flinched when touched. Alicia pulled up a chair beside her bed. You don't know me, she said softly, but I know what it's like to feel like your voice doesn't matter. Deja turned slightly, not quite meeting her eyes. I just wanted to say, Alicia continued, this place is yours too. No one gets to make you feel like a burden here. Not anymore. Deja's eyes welled up. A single tear slid down her cheek, and then, in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in days, she whispered, They said, you got fired for hitting someone. Alicia nodded slowly. I defended myself, and yes, they fired me. But I wasn't wrong. Deja stared at her, then, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Alicia reached forward and squeezed her hand. Just once. That night, when Alicia returned to her office, she found a small package on her desk. No return name, no label. Just a soft paper box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a plain white t-shirt, neatly folded. Across the front, in navy letters, were the words, Justice doesn't knock, it walks in. Alicia laughed, quiet and disbelieving. Beneath the shirt was a note. One line, printed in tight script. Some of us stayed, but we're changing things, because of you. No name, but Alicia knew. Knew it came from someone at St. Joseph's. One of the silent ones. Maybe Haley, maybe Jenna, maybe even someone she'd never spoken to. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. Change was moving, not loudly, not all at once, but like water through stone, slow, patient, unrelenting. Alicia folded the shirt, set it in the bottom drawer of her desk, and locked it, not to hide it, but to protect what it meant. By the end of the week, she would launch the first of a monthly series called Silent No More, a rotating session where staff across all departments would share stories of times they felt unseen, unheard, unsafe. It wouldn't be mandatory, but people would come. And in the weeks to follow, Havencrest would quietly become the hospital everyone wanted to work at. Not because of pay, not because of prestige, but because it felt like a place that remembered the humans in the uniforms. And in quiet moments, Alicia would return to that rooftop garden, sip her coffee, and watch the wind pass through the leaves. She would remember the slap, the silence, the shame. But more than that, she would remember the choice, the moment she could have stayed silent, could have walked away quietly, but didn't. And that made all the difference, because justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it arrives in a folded shirt, a whispered truth, a hospital transformed, or a woman who finally said, enough. By the time the first Silent No More session convened in a small auditorium on the west wing of Havencrest Medical Center, Alicia had almost convinced herself no one would come. The emails had gone out. The flyers had been pinned near the locker rooms and cafeteria. The wording had been careful, inviting but not demanding, empowering but never pitying. Come as you are. Speak if you want. Listen if you don't. Alicia had arrived 20 minutes early to set up the chairs in a wide circle. No podiums, no microphones. Because this wasn't a speech. It was space. A space where things that had once been whispered behind scrub rooms and hallway corners could be said out loud. And at 3:01 p.m., they came. First a nurse from radiology, then a janitor from environmental services, a pediatrician who looked too tired to smile, and finally a group of 3 interns, one of whom barely looked up from her shoes. By 3:15, there were 23 people seated. Alicia didn't speak right away. She simply nodded, breathed in, and said, "I'll start." She told her story, not in the way the internet had, not in the way the rumors had painted it, but in her words, her silence, her fear, the way her breath caught when she realized no one was going to defend her that night, and the way something inside her refused to be quiet, even when everything else had gone still. When she finished, there was no applause, just a pause, like the room was absorbing it. And then someone else spoke. A technician told of the time she was passed over for promotion, 3 times while training the people who replaced her. A supply clerk admitted to hiding his stutter in radio calls out of shame. A nurse assistant revealed that after losing a patient, he'd never told anyone he'd cried in the elevator all the way down to the basement. One by one, truth spilled. Not loud, not angry, just real. And in that hour, a hospital became more than walls and machines. It became a living system, capable of listening, of healing itself from within. After the session ended, people lingered. They hugged quietly. They left notes behind. One simply said, "I didn't know I was allowed to say these things." Alicia folded the note gently and slipped it into her journal. That evening, while she was finishing her chart reviews in her office, an email pinged. Subject, Media Inquiry, NBC Health Correspondent Request. Alicia froze. She clicked. A reporter had caught wind of Silent No More. They wanted to feature Havencrest's initiative as a new model for trauma-responsive leadership. The request was respectful, but the thought of becoming public again made her pulse spike. She had only just started to feel safe again. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the tab. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Havencrest had given her the gift of quiet leadership. She wouldn't trade it for headlines, not unless it could help someone more than it hurt her. That same night, across the city, Mr. Kane was being discharged. His condition had worsened slightly since the incident. Not from injury, he was fine, but from the pressure, the attention, the way nurses now avoided eye contact, the way orderlies became cold and efficient. He had become radioactive. Dr. Brown had insisted on handling the discharge himself, not as a courtesy, but to control the narrative. "Let's get you transitioned," he said stiffly. Mr. Kane smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. All this for one slap. Dr. Brown didn't respond, but something in his jaw tightened. Mr. Kane's arrogance hadn't vanished, but his power had. Outside the hospital, an ambulance driver helping him into the vehicle muttered under his breath, "You messed with the wrong woman." Mr. Kane didn't reply, but his hand trembled slightly as he pulled the blanket over his lap. Meanwhile, back at Havencrest, Alicia stepped into room 210, where a new patient had just been admitted. A girl no older than 19, bruises faint but present. Silence heavy in the air. Alicia introduced herself softly. The girl didn't respond, just stared past her at the window. Alicia didn't push. She pulled up a chair and sat. "You don't have to talk," she said gently, "but I'm here." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, the girl whispered, "Are you the nurse who slapped that man on the news?" Alicia turned slowly. "I am." "Did it help?" Alicia took a long breath. Eventually, the girl blinked. "My foster brother tried to touch me last night." Her voice was shaking. "No one believed me." Alicia didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She just reached out, took the girl's hand, and whispered, "I do." And in that moment, truth became oxygen. Somewhere, systems cracked. Somewhere, silence surrendered. And somewhere, a young girl began to breathe again. 3 weeks had passed since the first Silent No More session. And already Havencrest Medical Center was no longer just a hospital. It was becoming a case study. Administrators from 2 other facilities had quietly reached out, requesting to sit in on future sessions. A leadership podcast hosted by the American Medical Ethics Board quoted Alicia by name. And just last week, a senior director from a trauma unit uptown had emailed, "We want to model our staff support program after what you've started." It was surreal, not because she didn't believe in what she was doing, but because she never thought the world would care. And yet, they did. But visibility had its shadows, and they were starting to stretch toward her. It began with a message, a private one, anonymous. "You think you're a hero, but all you did was slap a sick man. Now you're trying to get famous for it?" Alicia deleted it without replying, but her chest burned. Then came another. "Maybe next time, keep your hands to yourself." That one she screenshot and forwarded to security. Havencrest had been clear. Any harassment would be addressed immediately. But the messages kept coming, from fake accounts, from voices cloaked in anonymity but sharpened by hate. Alicia didn't show it, but it weighed on her. Not because they could hurt her, but because part of her still carried the shame that someone had once made her feel like she had to defend herself in silence. But she wasn't that woman anymore, and she refused to become her again. One evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she noticed a man in the parking structure watching her from the far side. Not moving, not filming, just watching. She locked her doors faster that night, drove home with her eyes on the rearview mirror. When she told Carmen the next morning, the trauma specialist listened, face unreadable. "You're becoming a symbol, Alicia, and symbols scare people who benefit from silence." Alicia nodded. "But I'm still a person." "Exactly," Carmen replied. "Which is why you're going to do something most symbols forget to do. You're going to rest. You're going to set boundaries. Because we don't need another martyr. We need you alive." Alicia exhaled slowly. "I don't want to disappear again." "You're not disappearing. You're choosing when to show up. That's power." That same afternoon, Alicia announced a pause on the next Silent No More session, not to end it, but to restructure it with security and trauma-informed facilitation. Most people supported her, but a few online commenters, people who had never sat in the room, never bared their stories, accused her of folding. "You were brave," one said, "until it got too real." Alicia didn't respond, but she did write something in her journal that night. Courage is not proving you can bleed endlessly. It's knowing when to clot, when to heal, when to armor up in silence. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. She received an invitation, formal, from the New York State Board of Medical Standards. They wanted her to speak at their annual summit on institutional equity and staff protection in healthcare. She read the email twice. It felt too soon, too loud, too big. But then she remembered Deja, the girl in room 210 who whispered about her foster brother and asked, "Did it help?" And Alicia knew what she had to do. Not for herself, but for the girl who didn't have a platform, for the nurse still afraid to report, for the orderly who still laughed off racist jokes in the break room because he needed the paycheck. She replied, "Yes, I'll speak." The next week was a blur. She wrote her speech at night, tested her delivery in front of Carmen, rewrote it twice, trimmed the words until they felt like her own. Not polished, not perfect, but real. On the morning of the summit, she wore her white coat, not to blend in, but to reclaim it, not as a uniform, but as a flag. The conference hall was a sea of suits and stethoscopes. When she took the stage, murmurs filled the air. Some recognized her, some didn't. All waited. She took the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and said, 3 months ago, I was fired for defending myself. And for 3 days after that, no one called. Not even to ask if I was okay. But one red light was blinking in the hallway. A camera I didn't even know was there. That camera told the truth I couldn't convince people to hear. But this isn't a story about a slap. It's about the systems that reward silence, that punish resistance, and that call professionalism, the art of never making anyone uncomfortable. The room fell silent. But here's the thing, she continued. Some of us are already uncomfortable, every day, because of our skin, our voice, our trauma. And if healthcare is going to call itself healing, it needs to start with its own people. The applause was hesitant at first, then thunderous, not performative, but personal. People stood, a few cried. When she walked off stage, 3 directors approached her with immediate requests to collaborate. A nurse from Boston hugged her. I didn't know I needed to hear that until I did. Alicia thanked them, genuinely, then slipped away quietly. That night, back in her apartment, she removed her badge and coat, set them gently on the counter, and let the stillness return. She sat in her window seat, watching the city below. Somewhere, Mr. Kane was probably sitting in silence too. Somewhere, Dr. Brown was still rewriting policies out of guilt. Somewhere, a nurse who would never know her name was reporting an incident for the first time, because now she believed she might be believed. Alicia pressed her forehead to the glass and smiled, because she had become something more than the nurse who fought back. She had become the nurse who stayed standing, who dared to return, who reminded the system, we are not shadows on your wall, we are light, and we do not flicker. It had been nearly 2 months since Alicia Grant last stepped foot anywhere near St. Joseph's Clinic. The last time, her cheek was burning, her breath caught between disbelief and grief, and the only sound she remembered clearly was the echo of Dr. Brown's voice saying, "You're finished here?" But now, as she stood in front of the familiar glass doors once again, the silence was hers to own. She hadn't come to beg. She hadn't come to reclaim anything. She had come because they asked. An email, unexpected, unceremonious, had arrived in her inbox 3 days ago. Not from Dr. Brown, not from HR, but from a quiet name in the staff support division, Haley, the same young receptionist who had once looked down when Alicia walked out in shame. Her message was brief. There's a staff listening session next week. We're piloting something new. We'd be honored if you came, just to listen, just to show them it's possible to survive. Alicia had stared at that line for an hour. Just to show them it's possible to survive. She hadn't replied at first, not because she didn't want to go, but because she needed to be sure she wouldn't go for the wrong reasons. Vengeance, pride, guilt. She didn't want to carry any of those with her, and now, standing outside, she realized she wasn't. She stepped inside. The floor still shined the same way. The fern plants in the corner still drooped slightly from overwatering. The scent of antiseptic still hung in the air, clinical and cold. But the silence, different. It wasn't dismissive anymore. It was unsure, alert. A few heads turned, conversations dropped mid-sentence. One nurse whispered to another, and the other nodded slowly. Alicia didn't flinch. She walked straight toward the elevator, her back straight. The coat she wore not white this time, but navy. Her Haven Crest coat, the name Head Nurse, Acute Care Division, stitched in crisp lettering. The message was clear. I didn't come back to belong. I came back on my terms. A security officer was waiting at the conference room door upstairs. He smiled, not with pity, but with recognition. Good afternoon, Ms. Grant. We're glad you're here. Alicia nodded. Inside, about 30 staff members were seated in a semicircle. Some she recognized, some she didn't. Haley sat in the back, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. Dr. Brown was there too. He wasn't seated at the center like he once would have been. He sat at the side, not leading, listening. The woman facilitating the session, an external counselor, introduced Alicia as a peer observer from another institution. Alicia smiled at the phrasing: clean, neutral, protective. She didn't speak for the first 30 minutes. She just listened. Listened as a nurse admitted to not reporting a physician who made inappropriate comments because she didn't think anyone would believe her. Listened as a male staffer said he felt complicit for not speaking up when Alicia was fired. Listened as one of the janitors said, "The night she walked out, it got real quiet in here, like the air didn't want to be inside the walls anymore." Then slowly the room turned to her. She didn't stand, she didn't raise her voice. She just said, "I walked out of this place thinking no one would ever remember my name without a whisper attached to it. But now, I'm here. And I realize the only whisper that matters is the one inside me that said, don't give them the ending they expect." Dr. Brown looked up, their eyes met. And for the first time, there was no defense in his gaze, only a quiet, exhausted truth. When the session ended, people approached her, not as fans, not as colleagues, as witnesses. One handed her a folded piece of paper. "I never said anything before. I'm saying it now. Thank you." As Alicia turned to leave, Dr. Brown stepped closer. He didn't reach out. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "We're changing because you refuse to disappear." Alicia looked at him for a long moment, then replied, "Make sure no one else ever has to disappear to make this place wake up." She walked out before he could say anything else. Outside, the sky had turned orange-gray, dusk bleeding into the city skyline. Alicia exhaled. She had gone back, not for closure, but for continuity. Because healing isn't a door you slam shut. It's a hallway you choose to walk past without fear. And today, she had walked that hallway again. But this time, the echo of her steps was strength, not silence. At Havencrest, spring had started to creep in through the edges of the windows, just barely noticeable at first. A bloom outside the break room, a robin resting on the ledge of the pediatric wing. And on the 4th floor, inside Alicia's office, a new energy was beginning to grow too. Not just healing, not just resolve, but something else: legacy. The silent no more sessions had returned, this time with co-facilitators, wellness teams, and safeguards in place. But Alicia had started something new, a mentorship program for interns and first-year staff. She called it the Anchor Circle, because some people don't need to be rescued. They just need someone to stand beside them long enough for the tide to pass. On the first day, only 5 interns showed up, mostly quiet, mostly unsure. But Alicia could see it in their posture, their questions, the way they looked at the floor when speaking about their first patient death, or their fear of saying no to a senior nurse. She opened the session with something simple. "I'm not here to teach you how to be perfect. I'm here to teach you how not to disappear." There was a pause. Then one of the interns, a shy Vietnamese-American nurse named Min, raised his hand. "Can I ask, how did you not give up? After what happened?" Alicia looked at him. Her voice didn't waver. "Because I remembered what it cost me to stay quiet, and because someone younger than me was always watching, even if I didn't know it." Min nodded slowly. "My sister followed your story. She wants to be a nurse now." Alicia smiled, deeply moved. "Then let's make sure she has a different world to step into." Later that week, Alicia received a letter in the mail, a real letter, in ink, no return address. Inside was a note written in careful, blocky handwriting. "You don't know me, but my mother worked in your hospital when everything went down. She used to say you walked like someone who had something to protect. I didn't understand that until I watched the footage, until I heard your story. I just wanted to say, I see it now. You weren't protecting yourself. You were protecting all of us." Alicia read the letter 3 times, then folded it and placed it into a slim black journal titled Testimonies I Didn't Ask For, But Needed. She'd started it only weeks earlier. Now, it was already filling. At the next Anchor Circle meeting, she brought in a guest speaker, Kesha, the nurse who once messaged Alicia when she was first fired. Kesha told the group about her own experience years earlier at a different hospital where she had been targeted for refusing to falsify a chart. "I didn't speak up," she said quietly. "I told myself it wasn't the right time. But then I saw Alicia do it, and I realized there's never a right time for the truth. There's only courage and consequences, and you have to live with both. The interns were silent, but Alicia saw something flicker behind their eyes. Not fear, but permission. And sometimes that's the hardest gift to receive. One day, walking past the staff bulletin board, Alicia stopped. A flyer had been posted. Words that changed our culture. It was a collage, quotes from various staff at Haven Crest. Some were poetic, others were blunt. But one, framed in a box at the center, read simply, "If someone makes you feel unsafe, I'll be your voice until you find yours." Nurse Alicia Grant. She hadn't known someone had written that down, had remembered it, had chosen to make it a banner. She stood there for a moment, one hand resting over her chest. Not because it was her words, but because they had been heard. That same afternoon, a young black girl, barely 19, arrived for her first volunteer day. She was assigned to Alicia's unit. She moved nervously, carrying supply trays, triple-checking forms, always apologizing before speaking. Alicia gently pulled her aside. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Janelle," she whispered. "Do you want to be a nurse?" "I think so," Janelle said, eyes wide. "But I don't know if I'm good enough." Alicia leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what someone once told me when I was 19? Janelle shook her head. "Nothing. No one told me anything. That's why I'm going to tell you this now." Alicia placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not here to prove you belong. You're here because you already do. And I'm going to make sure no one forgets that." Janelle's lips trembled into a smile. That evening, after the unit had quieted down and the halls returned to their soft night rhythm, Alicia sat in her office, looking out at the skyline. Haven Crest had become something more than just a hospital to her. It was soil, and everything she'd planted, every word, every truth, every hard choice, was starting to grow, and grow, and grow. But she also knew something else. Soil needed tending, and legacy didn't build itself. It had to be protected. The phone on her desk buzzed once. It was a message from an unknown number. But the name made her pause. Dr. Angela Barrett, Director of Nursing, Haven Crest, her boss, her mentor. It read, "Alicia, next week the mayor's office is requesting to meet about citywide adoption of Haven Crest's wellness model. I'd like you to join the delegation. Think of it as bringing the garden to every hospital." Alicia stared at the message. The city, the system. The same walls that once pushed her out were now asking her to help build new doors. She typed back, "Let's bring the whole toolbox." The conference room on the 32nd floor of the New York City Department of Public Health didn't look like a place where revolutions happened. The walls were a polished slate gray, the table a glossy oval of oak. Nameplates stood in precise rows. Leather chairs waited with the cold patience of bureaucracies used to pretending they cared. But when Alicia Grant stepped through the frosted glass doors, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like an intruder. She felt necessary. At her side was Dr. Angela Barrett, Director of Nursing at Haven Crest. And across the table were commissioners, hospital administrators, ethics board executives, and a deputy from the mayor's staff. Most of them didn't know Alicia by face, but they knew the story, the headlines, the footage, the ripple, the policies now named Grant Protocol. A few looked curious, others guarded. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Angela began the meeting with numbers, efficiency gains, staff retention rates post-policy, improvements in patient satisfaction since Haven Crest implemented trauma-informed staff protections. "But," she said finally, gesturing to Alicia, "this isn't about numbers, it's about people, and no one can speak to that better than Alicia." Silence. Alicia stood, not because she was told to, because she chose to. "Most of you know what happened to me, and if you don't, the internet will fill in the details. But I'm not here to relive the incident. I'm here because what happened after is what matters." Her voice was even, not defiant, not performative, just real. "I was fired for defending myself against a patient who touched me inappropriately. Fired by a director who thought his reputation was worth more than my dignity. And for 3 days, I sat in my apartment thinking that silence had won." She paused. The room was still. But then the camera footage surfaced, and my story shifted from an accusation to evidence, from an incident to a catalyst. But here's what I want you to understand. The footage didn't save me. The truth was already there. The only thing that changed was that someone finally looked. She let that land. And now, because of that shift, Haven Crest has become a model, not because we're perfect, but because we stopped asking how much discomfort truth would cost and started asking how much damage silence was doing. A man across the table, an older hospital CEO, cleared his throat. Ms. Grant, what you're saying is powerful, but implementing these reforms citywide, well, there are budget constraints, legal challenges, layers of union contracts. With all due respect, sir, Alicia said, there were budget constraints when they said I was disposable too. But somehow, they found the money to replace me. The real issue isn't money, it's priority. He shifted in his seat. Others nodded slowly. Angela leaned in. We're not asking for a miracle. We're offering a framework, a cultural roadmap. This city doesn't need perfection. It needs honesty and leadership that starts from the inside out. The mayor's deputy scribbled notes, then looked up. If we endorse this citywide, will you speak on its behalf? Alicia paused. The question wasn't a trap, but it wasn't light either. Her face had become shorthand for change, and now they wanted to pin an entire policy movement to that face. Yes, she said at last. I will, but not as a spokesperson, as a witness. Because if I've learned anything, it's that institutions don't change because of pressure. They change because people inside them refuse to disappear. The room was quiet, but this time it wasn't dismissive. It was reverent. Hours later, Alicia walked out of the building into late afternoon sun. The streets buzzed with normalcy, horns blaring, vendors shouting, city buses groaning at red lights. But her phone buzzed with something new, an internal memo. NYC Public Health Committee approves grant protocol for pilot implementation in 3 city hospitals effective next quarter. She stopped walking, closed her eyes, and for a moment, let it all crash through her at once. The girl who cried on her kitchen floor months ago. The woman who stood in front of power and didn't flinch. The quiet voice that refused to be erased. That night, she returned to Havencrest. Not to work, just to walk the halls. To see the faces of the nurses who now smiled more, to hear the laughter in the break room, to pass by the bulletin board and see a new flyer. We're building something here. Don't stay quiet. Stay present. Nurse Alicia Grant. She didn't post it. Someone else did. And maybe that was the greatest victory. Not that she had built something, but that others had started carrying it forward. She paused at the nurse's station, looked around, then whispered, mostly to herself, I was never supposed to be at that table, but I was, and next time, I won't be the only one. Months later, on a gentle Sunday morning, when most of the city was still asleep, Alicia Grant stood alone in Havencrest's rooftop garden. The lavender had bloomed early this year, dotting the edges of the walking path with streaks of soft purple. Wind rustled through the trees. Below her, the hospital pulsed with quiet purpose, monitors beeping, nurses moving room to room, lives changing in the spaces between breath. Alicia closed her eyes for a moment and let the sound wash over her. Not long ago, she had thought she'd never wear scrubs again, never walk into a hospital without remembering the sting of betrayal. But here she was, not surviving, leading. A soft knock behind her made her turn. Janelle, the young volunteer from weeks ago, now officially a nursing student, stood with a clipboard tucked to her chest. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said. Alicia smiled. You didn't. Janelle stepped forward. I just wanted to say thank you. I turned in my application for residency next year, and when they asked me on the form what inspired me to pursue nursing, I wrote your name. Alicia blinked, words caught in her throat. I just thought you should know, Janelle said, and turned to go. Alicia called after her. You'll be more than I ever was, Janelle. That's the point. Build higher than me. Janelle smiled and disappeared back into the building. Alicia turned back to the garden. There had been no awards, no magazine covers, no national headlines beyond that one article early on. But none of it had been for fame. It had been for one simple, radical thing. The belief that telling the truth shouldn't cost you your career. The policies inspired by her case had now been implemented in 10 hospitals across the state, with more joining every quarter. Dr. Brown had stepped down from his director position at St. Joseph's quietly. No scandal, no ceremony, but rumor had it he now taught part-time, his first session titled, What I Failed to See. Kane had disappeared from the public record. No more whispers, no more power, just gone. And Alicia? She had started writing, not a book, not yet, but reflections, testimonies, a project called Voices from the Break Room. Stories from nurses, techs, janitors, interns, anyone who had ever been made to feel small in a place built to heal. She didn't want to be remembered as the woman who slapped back. She wanted to be remembered as the woman who refused to vanish, as the one who broke the echo chamber of silence with nothing more than her truth. That evening, Alicia hosted one final Silent No More session before the program was handed over to a new rotating team. She didn't open it with a speech. She sat among them, equal, listening, watching new leaders rise, not loud, not demanding, but certain. After the session, as people filtered out, Min, the intern from her very first anchor circle, approached. "Can I ask you something personal?" Alicia nodded. "Do you ever get tired of carrying all this?" Alicia paused, then smiled gently. "Every day, but I rest. I remember that we don't carry it forever. We carry it long enough so others won't have to. And then we teach them how to carry it differently." He nodded. "I'll try." "You won't try," she said. "You'll do it, and you'll do it better." He walked away, and Alicia stood alone again, the room now empty, the chairs still slightly warm from presence. She picked up a discarded note from the table. It read, "Thank you for showing us that stillness can be strength." Alicia folded it, slipped it into her pocket, and turned off the lights. As she walked through the hall one last time that night, she didn't rush. She didn't look back. She just moved forward, calm, tall, the same way she had walked out of St. Joseph's all those months ago. Except this time, the door didn't close behind her with a slam. It stayed open, for others, for the future, for the voices that would never be silenced again. Alicia Grant didn't ask to become a symbol. She only asked to be heard. And because she refused to vanish, an entire system was forced to listen. From one hallway to a hospital, from a hospital to a city. She proved that truth, no matter how quietly spoken, will echo if you dare to say it out loud. If this story moved you, share it. Let others know that silence is not strength, but standing up quietly, without fear, is. Comment below, have you ever felt silenced in your workplace? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because Flow Story brings you the voices that refuse to stay quiet.